Thank you very much, and thanks to the organization for inviting us today. We're going to have a panel, and it's going to be about venture capital and private equity. It's the venture capital and private equity investor roundtable. I think we're going to be a bit short of the private equity people. It's more venture capital here. And we have corporate venture capital on board. We have independent venture capital. We have the EIB and us moderating. So we're definitely going to start with a round of introduction. And I will ask you, especially the investors, to also touch on what you're interested in terms of investment for this year. The word, please, my co-chair, Victoria, please go ahead.
Yes, I'm very pleased to be here. I edit the publication MedNous, which is for the biotech industry. I'm very interested in hearing what the panel has to say about the outlook for 2026. We had a really interesting presentation initially where this Stifel outlook looked promising for possibly IPOs and mergers and acquisitions and various other things. So I'm very interested in hearing what people have to say on this subject.
So if we go to personal introductions, Ari-Pekka, Laitsaari, EIB, venture debt. I'm probably the only non-doctor on the table. So I'm an egghead banker for 20 plus years experience on the industry. As I always say, the people I mentor, this is a area of where you need to have the passion in order to succeed. And it has become a passion to understand the life sciences. And every morning that you wake up, it is a privilege, an honor to kind of like go to the office and say like, maybe I can cure people some today. Maybe I can provide kind of like a better quality of life, or best of all worlds, maybe I can save a life today with what I'm doing. So with that, I try to kind of like contribute on EIB side on providing the funding to the ecosystem in Europe, and from there on to provide more medicine for more people, pretty much. Thank you.
Well, you can't do it without the capital, can you? Really a pleasure to be here. My name is Laura Lane. I am the head of Europe for Lilly Ventures, which is the corporate venture capital organization at Eli Lilly and Company. We're a global team with teams based in sort of hotspots around the world. As you can imagine, East Coast, West Coast of the US, Asia, as well as Europe. And we do a number of different things. We obviously make direct equity investments into early stage biotech companies. And these are predominantly still at the very early stage. So often platform technologies, new science, new biology, new chemistry, with often, teams that are perhaps just getting going. We do back some slightly more mature companies, but again, perhaps with technologies or modalities that are yet to really be kind of fully validated from the perspective of, approved drugs and such like. We're obviously in a very privileged position at Lilly right now where, the company is, it's still in a very significant growth phase. And so we're really thinking about, what else can we do to support that kind of early stage biotech ecosystem, whether it's through some of our other, I guess, sort of departments that have other things to offer, such as our gateway labs, communities, or perhaps consulting, or sort of federated learning models for drug discovery. And this, of course, jives nicely, of course, with the wider sort of enterprise effort with, I guess, the more traditional external innovation teams, which, many of you will know very well through our search and evaluation and BD team. So it's meant to be kind of like a very kind of full stack support of the biotech ecosystem, as well as obviously supporting those novel technologies and novel companies. We're really also looking to support, I suppose, a bit like Ari as well, the investors and the funders that are also looking to back both those early stage companies, but also things that are slightly greater maturity as well. So we work with a number of fund partners globally as well, both formally and more informally as well, to make sure that there's capital in that system. And I think the other thing that I would just say from a European perspective is that sometimes it's a little bit more challenging to find the exact person in a large US corporation. And so, my team and also a number of the folks that are based over here in Europe, obviously, have an interest in making sure that the really good quality companies and really good quality science also can get to the right people in the US if they're the decision makers from the perspective of adding new assets to the pipeline or research collaborations.
Thank you, Laura. And Michael?
Yeah, good morning. My name is Michael Bauer. So I'm a partner with Novo Holdings Venture Investments. So we're part of a large investment universe. For our liking, we about 30 people divided over 5 different sites: Copenhagen, London, Boston, San Francisco. Small spearhead in Asia. So our focus on the venture side is really sort of more the later stage companies. So we would consider ourselves mostly Series B investors. And so we're really looking for therapeutic modalities, not so much on the platform side. I mean, we really like to see product ideas that we can drive together with the teams through the clinical development. We spend about $600 to $800 million a year. We're an evergreen fund, so we're very different from most other more traditional fund structures. Very privileged, of course, with the one LP with Novo Nordisk. Yet I have to stress here that we're not a strategic investor, so different to Laura. I'm sitting here as an independent investor. We don't invest for or with Novo Nordisk. They are a completely independent entity, and we try to keep the walls as high as possible between the mothership and us. Our job is really sort of to make good returns for the Novo Nordisk Foundation, which in turn sort of gives a lot of grants to science and society. Last year, $1.3 billion in grants in the philanthropic area, mostly science. So what we're looking for is really sort of high science, high data-driven companies that are closing in on the clinical stage or early clinical stage companies, where we, with our knowledge and our financial strength, can make a difference for the companies. Usual check sizes for us is about 20 million and up, and sort of always will insist on a board seat. We like to have a hand on the wheel, because again, sort of from my perspective, I come with a long operating background, 22 years in biotech and pharma on clinical development. So it's really years of that experience that you bring to the table, hopefully helping the teams to make the best decisions. So.
Thierry, thank you.
Good morning. So I'm Thierry Laugel. I represent Kurma partner. I'm a managing partner and founder of this organization. So we are much smaller than my neighbor. We have about €1 billion under management, hopefully growing. Our focus in terms of investment is throughout the value chain, but we are importantly focused on early stage funding. We build companies and we hopefully help them develop toward the clinic and the product. But our preferred positioning is early stage creation, seed, Series A, through our biofund franchise, but we also have built a few years ago a growth franchise, which is growing and hopefully will also be part of a larger funding of our portfolio companies and beyond. Importantly, on the early stage field, we also have a sister company, Argo Bio Studio, which is an incubator and accelerator early stage project, in particular academic project, and very much focus on European innovation and try to translate science, built in the best, hopefully the best science generated in Europe, and make it translatable and hopefully global and translated into medicine a day. So what are we interested in? Great science first, and hopefully ways to develop this project further on. So we are very open, I hope at least, and opportunistic, and we need cooperation with all my colleagues around the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Thierry, and thank you all. And a bit also about myself, Diana Saraceni. I'm a co-founder and managing partner at Panakès. I have 25 years of venture capital experience. With Panakès, we invest mostly in seed A and B rounds across different therapeutic areas and also across different segments, including devices, drug delivery technologies, therapeutics, and diagnostic. Ticket size, we invest anything between 6 and 10 million, and we follow on larger rounds. And as many of my colleagues here on the panel, which is really covering most segments from early to late approach, including fund of fund, including venture debt. I'm also very active and driven by ethical, very, very driven by ethical reasons in what we do. I think the entire industry is. So let's work together, and let's the panel start with a very broad question. Maybe Victoria, do you want to take the first question for the panelists?
Yeah, I don't think we want to talk about the geopolitical situation.
No, but maybe just no. It's not the geopolitical per se, and we will avoid any.
What I found interesting that was said by almost everyone in a different way was new modalities, and this applies both to the early and to the late stage. And I'm just wondering whether there's anything further that could be said at this point about the classic modalities and where we're taking them.
I'm happy to have a crack to start with. I mean, I suppose I mentioned, new modalities and, new approaches from a therapeutics perspective, but, we still do a lot of investments in small molecules and antibodies or related, all the sort of, I guess, the tried and tested methods. I think the other thing that has become sort of expanded in the last few years, and I'd be interested in what the rest of the panel think, is that we're also seeing kind of lots of different sort of conjugate and combination type of modalities as well. So an antibody plus something else, adding an RNA to something, adding a peptide. So linking technologies and those sorts of other sort of, I guess, enabling pieces that have become really important as well. And that's obviously within the context of, gene therapies and cell therapies that have, from an advanced modality standpoint, are now getting towards, I guess, later stage proof points. They aren't quick to do. They're not easy to do. But I think it's also really interesting that we are getting, data and, a greater bolus of companies that are perhaps getting to data that's then going to be obviously convincing to, a broader church that, this is something that can really meaningfully add to the sort of portfolio of modalities that we have. At Lilly, we're really engaged across like the whole spectrum of modalities, whether it's ASOs, whether it's RNA, whether it's small, large, and sort of really everything in between. And I think it really just comes down to, what are you trying to treat and how are you trying to treat it, and what makes sense from a target product profile perspective. So really take a very modality agnostic approach. And I think the other thing that we have done in ventures, which again, we might be right, or this might just be a very long journey that we're on, is that we have also looked to back early stage companies that are prosecuting new modalities that actually, maybe they're one of very few companies, or maybe they're the only company working on a particular new modality. It's something that they have developed, which again can take, some time to get off the ground and needs that early stage capital to do it. But we feel like it's worth the risk to try, obviously with other partners and with other syndicate partners. I think one of the things that's been more challenging, and I definitely don't need to tell this room, who I'm sure have been out there treading the boards and fundraising, that for those early stage or for those, modalities or new technologies that, aren't yet proven, it has been a challenging time. And so, as an investor, while we invest in a lot of companies, at Lilly, we don't, from a ventures perspective, we don't lead rounds. And so we really need the network of really strong co-investors that are going to help shape and bring those syndicates together. So while we definitely want additional friends and support around that table, because we definitely can't do it on our own.
Michael, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe I'm picking up on and echo a lot of what Laura said, but I want to bring the attention back a little bit to the maybe not geopolitical position, but really sort of the previous panel already mentioned the European Life Science Coalition, Novo Holdings together with Forbion, Sofinova, HealthCap, VIB and Omega, Kempen, Cooley, Covington really sort of started the effort, and hopefully many more will join in an effort to liberate a lot more money in Europe for biotech. And I think sort of in this entire funding situation, I think we see a sort of a drought of early stage funding, which is really sort of dismal. Europe is a hotbed for innovation. We have great universities, great research there, a lot of IP positions, but we are not really very good at turning it into companies and great successes. I mean, yet despite this, there are a couple of European bellwethers out there. We saw this morning from Stifel. European listed companies can do extremely well, generate a lot of wealth. Yet we really falling even further behind. 7% of life science funding in Europe, 63% of money spent in the US, and 14% in China. So we already the third place, have been for some time. If you compare sort of what the private actors, sort of pension funds mostly spend on 0.02% in Europe, 2% in the US. This is entire venture, not just biotech, but just the difference in the numbers is really, really staggering. And so even a small increment on the European side will go a very long way. So I really hope that initiative really is very successful and will gather more momentum, because we really need to look out for Europe. And coming back to the geopolitical situation, nothing is as bad that it isn't good for something. I think this idea that we really have to kind of look out for ourselves and do more, and not just sort of probably sort of a piggyback on other people's efforts, that's becoming even more important. And so I think this is something to look forward to in the future. And we really have to become, significantly better. I mean, we don't even have an IPO market. Whatever IPOs needs to go to the US in order to raise significant funds. So it's really a dire situation here. So I hope we can all kind of pull together and get out of this rut, because again, the one thing as a later stage investor that worries me a lot is that we start to have this funding crisis of earlier stage companies, difficult to raise the money. But it's that substrate that is important for us to put more money in later on. And so even though we have a seeds department that does a wonderful job, right? It is a concerted effort across funds to keep that ecosystem alive and keep fostering it and growing it. And so this is certainly also one of our efforts. So we continue also on the venture side to spend significant amount of time and money on fledgling mostly European companies in our case. So we try to increase the amount of funding that we can actually deploy in Europe. There's really no boundary for us. It's really an opportunity-driven thing. And again, coming back, the major ingredient is good science, breakthrough science. Can we see something that is going to really move the needle instead of just being incremental? That is really sort of the spaces that we're looking towards.
Thank you. Very interesting. So it seems like there's, all this market volatility and nervousness that we're seeing out of the geopolitical situation. That's also translating into Europe feeling more as a single ecosystem and working to adapt and being conscious that we are more and more independent in that. So there's some benefit for the early stage in particular. Thierry, do you want to comment?
No, not really much more to say. I think it's very important what you said, Michael. And again, it's we know that the first risk of failure in biotech is simply money, lack of money. And when you look at numbers, it's of course needs a strong wake up in Europe to make things possible, because things of course are possible, and we are probably positive and optimistic, but things need to happen. And just in terms of fundraising, because we continuously raise funds and try to raise money. All of the people is raising money for their company, but venture capital investor raise money too, and spend a lot of time on the road to raise money, and private money, institutional investors' money in Europe is very difficult to get. So I think we can all talk about it, and it's a pity. It's a pity to say, Michael, your numbers were very, very important to remind to each of us. It's something we should be shocked about, to see that there is a cultural questions and possibly a cultural problem about the culture of risk and building the future for the community. So it is important as a whole, as you said, Diana, that Europe as a whole decide to build for the future and to invest more money into the future and what will build the future. So it's a bit of geopolitical that we wanted to avoid, but why not? Thank you.
I think I would maybe also add something just to pick up on what Michael and Thierry were saying. So, this sort of feast and famine of funding at the early stage is obviously like a concern if you're a later stage investor, because you're going to need something to bag. Obviously, we want partners at that earlier stage because we want to get these things off the ground. And again, it's done fully in mind that the fact that if they don't mature and they don't get backed by the investors, they then are not available, obviously, for pharma from an enterprise perspective. So it's all part of the same kind of food chain. But I think there has also been a trend in the last, half decade around, a number of funds that, perhaps have a reputation in Europe for returns to their LPs and to their investors, to then also, found kind of early stage funds or have accelerator programs. And, I can think obviously like the Kurma Argo Bio system, you've obviously already mentioned Novo Seeds, Sofinova have their bio accelerator or velociter as well. And so I guess, one of the things that we hope there is that those programs can go on to be as successful as possible. It's kind of a blended, if you've got LPs, hopefully that back across like a fund manager structure, then that's a good thing. Obviously, there's probably going to be something of a more blended return, but equally, you can't just pick the fund that's necessarily the growth fund that's going to be like one round in and out, great returns, because of course, while that's very attractive from a financial perspective, if you've not backed those early things, then you're not going to have that in 5 or 10 years time. So I think we really, biotech is definitely, we have to take the long view because it does take 10 years to develop a medicine. And so, we really hope that, that longer view of being able to have, fund managers that are looking at like all stages and can kind of, even pass things sort of through their different funds as the companies mature is important. But notwithstanding that, there's a lot of really good seed players out there who are often quite geographically restricted, because if you're going to pick up and help a founder build a company, you probably want to be down the road, not, a 3-hour flight away. So, I think it's also equally important as we have, larger fund managers prioritize accelerator or early stage funds or seed funds or build funds, that the traditional seed funds are also getting the support they need. And I think that's obviously where, EIB and some of the more public funders can then also make sure that some of that is, gets the due fair and attention. So perhaps over to you, Ari.
Yeah, well, thank you. there's a kind of like bit of contradiction, as Thierry was saying, that the primary problem is the money, and as you say that there's enough support mechanisms already for a seed, and I agree with you. I'm saying that the starting up the company and getting the early stage funding, we have enough governmental organizations around the Europe which will provide you kind of like to take off. But from there on, you continue in your trajectory of developing your science, developing your company. You end up in a bit of a valley of death when you come to the A round. And there, the problem, I always remember this. About 20 years ago, I was talking with the CEO of the Medicon Valley Academy in Denmark. And he was saying that he's pissed off. He's pissed off that his best scientists are running around the Europe chasing money instead of sitting in the lab and doing what they're supposed to do. And this is the biggest problem, I think, that there's no problem of getting the company initiated, getting it started, getting it off the ground. But where it hits kind of like the turbulence is exactly when it's growing its trajectory and it needs additional funding to extend the runway towards the next level of science. And this is where we need to get better. And as Laura was mentioning, that we need to work together in order to be able to provide the funds for those companies which are viable and have the capacity in order to make the next level. But this is also for us as investor community to separate the wheat from the chaff, to see which companies really are. I remember from my early stages in again, I'm referring to Denmark. I don't know why, but that seems to be a peculiar thing for me right now. I visited 2 breast cancer companies, one after another, and both of them said that, yeah, we have the pivotal molecule. We can make the difference, and we are certain that we are going to make to the next stage. And coming after the meetings, I was like, what the hell, you know? I'm an egghead banker. I have no way of understanding which one of those 2 is actually the one who's going to make it, if neither of them. Yeah. So this is the educating us as investors to understand which companies are going to make it and not make it. Because in terms of science, I mean, for every scientist having their company, they believe in their technology like hell and high water, and that is rightly so. But it's for us as investors to make sure that, listen, you know, make the reality check on those things and say, like, listen, you know, this is it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say that as scientists and investors, we don't have a crystal ball either. I mean, the reality is that of course, management teams are going to be enthusiastic about their programs. It's their job to be, and they've worked hard on this. But like, no one has a crystal ball. And like, you know, what do we have to do? We have to run the experiment. And sometimes the experiments are just expensive, long, and, you know, come after a whole range of other experiments you had to get on. But I think maybe what Thierry mentioned earlier about risk profile, I just wanted to like compare and contrast the US versus European piece. So, you know, we see, you know, a lot of companies get founded in the US, and I think the difference is you can have an idea and a plan and you can raise 60 million. And that's not an unreasonable thing to do. And you have a chance to pivot. And if things don't work out, then, you know, modify your plan, and you can do that in private and you know, have some successes and perhaps have some minor failures on the way, but you can navigate your way to success. And I think the difference here is that, you know, a company here might be trying to raise 15 million, but we expect them to have in vivo proof of concept. And so that disconnect, and I think really it's not about, you know, in the US you can raise this with this data, and in Europe you can only raise that money with more data. It's about the risk appetite. It's about, why aren't we willing to write the check for the idea and the good plan with the team that we think, with a good win can deliver, and hold people to this kind of higher standard of like, well, why don't you have in vivo proof of concept? And I can't believe you don't have a DC yet. You're like, well, they've only been going 2 years. So I think that's the piece that we have to kind of get alignment on. It's not about, biotech in Europe and biotech in the US or biotech in China. Yes, there's some price differential, but like they largely take the same number from a team perspective, from a cash perspective. It's not like there are some places where it is slightly cheaper to develop things, but equally it's not so much about that. We're not off by orders of magnitude on that. What we're off by orders of magnitude on is the risk appetite to provide the capital so that European companies can pivot or adapt in private and then come with data to be able to raise the next round. For me, that feels like the kind of crunch piece, which we need to kind of get alignment on.
Thank you. Can I go back and take advantage of the different views on the panel about portfolio construction? Are we as investors most of the time opportunistic on a case-by-case basis, or is there anyone and at what level do we try to build up some rational portfolios? When we pass on a deal, is that because we don't like that deal, or because it doesn't fit the portfolio? And with the different investors we have, definitely would love to see how the corporate venture capital reasoning is different than more independent and financially only driven venture capitalists. So I don't know do you want to start, Michael?
Yeah, happy to. So, that's an interesting question. So, if I look at our shop, many of the deals are driven by the partners that find the deals, that get excited and bring it to the IC. In our case, that's the partnership. And then, of course, really, it's really the rest of the partnership that tries to put the sanity check on if you have started to drink too much of your own Kool-Aid. It really is an important piece, sort of. But the importance is it's still science and data driven on every single deal. Then at the end, if you can kind of get conviction on that, you make that last sanity check. Okay, does that risk-reward profile fit into our existing portfolio? Our portfolio is relatively large with about 70-odd companies, so there's really room to go a little bit left or right. But in full transparency, we've looked into ours and sort of started to realize we have a lot of high risk, high reward deals. And we all know that, that they're not all of them come through. So we have made a deliberate move to kind of really balance things a little bit more, to make sure that we kind of, sort of not kind of overload on one thing. But to Laura's point, right, I think very important cultural difference, this the haves and not haves. If you don't have money early on and that trajectory that Ari-Pekka sort of alluded to, it's a bit like biology. If you start off as a runt, you'll never become large. Mm-hmm. And that's the same with a biotech company. If you start off as a runt, you'll be small for the rest of your life if you even make it. And that's basically what we do by underfunding our companies. So again, sort of the plea really, if we find a good idea, we really have to be bold enough to really back that idea wholeheartedly until the data. And that's the only thing the data tell us, that we have to pivot and that we should do that, of course. But it's that risk appetite. I completely agree with you. That is really sort of the lacking ingredient together with the money.
I'd just like to follow up the risk appetite question and ask Laura in particular whether this might be connected to the way the science is organized and whether the ecosystems could work better. In other words, in Kendall Square, you often have a lot of competition between companies that are very physically close to each other. Is there a need to have a better communications or better ecosystem network in Europe?
I'll put that on. So risk and the community. So this is also one of the I guess, perennial problems of working within Europe, especially when, obviously we sit within a large, US organization. We have hotspots in Europe, but there's good science everywhere. I mean, we've done quite a lot of work in the DACH region over the last couple of years, as many of you will know. And, it's not like, in the UK, you can sort of think, look, you've got the Golden Triangle, you've got Cambridge, you've got Oxford, you've got London. That's like where the majority of things are. But if you go to Germany, yes, okay, Munich has good strength, but then you've got Munich. You've got, when we actually looked at Germany in terms of like where, again, the most interesting companies we had seen in a previous year, like pick the top 10, they all were headquartered in different cities, which I think kind of speaks to the point of the, it's very devolved in terms of like where good science is. I think because of the strength of like academic science in Europe, it's not like you've just got like, 3 good places. You've got great places, and you've got ETH, you've got EPFL, you've got Sorbonne, you've got great institutions for learning like all over the place, which is good from a European perspective. That's what we've been encouraging for, often hundreds of years. So it's kind of not surprising that we have this kind of strong diversity. But what it obviously makes it more challenging for is when you're building an ecosystem that needs capital and people and the ability to move around and like that experience, it's not so straightforward to make it from, Lisbon to Stockholm. It's just more challenging. And, we have our own, I guess, idiosyncrasies, across Europe, which, we also love. So it's also, I think there's a tension there as well. I think in terms of just thinking about like what we're trying to do at Lilly Ventures, so very much agree. We're all driven by the science and the data first. And, at the moment, and we have been like this since sort of the I guess the latest incarnation of Lilly Ventures, is that we're very risk on, deliberately so. Because if we're not risk on now as an organization, like, because we're thinking about the next 5, 10, 20 years, we've had obviously, some, I guess, unprecedented success in a number of different therapeutic areas, which, need no further comment. But that ability to like use that and then make sure that we are backing things that even we don't have necessarily like, complete full conviction on, because how could you possibly? We have to take a portfolio approach in terms of like looking at a whole range of different things. There's actually, I think it's a chapter in Don Drakeman's Business of Biotech book where they look at kind of, modalities, or they look at companies that are emerging in new spaces. And even though venture capitalists or investors will tell you like, I can spot a really great technology or a drug, actually, if you look at the data, it's much harder to sort of see right at the early stage what's going to be successful. And so our approach is that, we are building a portfolio, but we don't have to, in some ways, think as much as a sort of financial investor about like, well, if I'm going to do some early stage things, I might have to do them right at the beginning of the fund, and towards the later of the fund, I might have to have some things that are slightly more quick wins. What we're trying to do at Lilly is kind of maintain that high level of kind of risk on, it doesn't have to be early stage, but it can be kind of like a high level of risk, even kind of, perhaps clinically as well. Maybe we're looking at things in like neuropsychiatry or cell therapy, for example. So with that kind of risk on kind of attitude, to really try and continue to kind of push the boundaries of what kind of medical science can do. There will be some successes and there will be some failures. But of course, we're not going to know about that for, at least 5 to 10 years, perhaps even longer in some cases. So, I think there has to be a place for kind of a risk on mentality. And I think given the strength of the science and, foundational work that is done, throughout Europe in very good institutions, that, we should, that risk on, those scientists in those institutions are actually risk on. I think what we don't do is sort of like champion the fact that they are. I think you can often see, we often, look at, some of our experience in Germany and think that it's more of a conservative, it's slightly more conservative in terms of like entrepreneurship. But actually in terms of the bravery of the science they're doing, it's not conservative at all. So for me, it's kind of interesting to see how we're not conservative from a scientific perspective, and yet we sort of then place these kind of conservative bounds or language around it which actually doesn't reflect the reality. So I guess it's just trying to maybe find the right language, or champion actually what is really going on.
Thank you, Laura. And just go back maybe, Thierry, on the portfolio construction and the priorities and the therapeutic areas maybe where that gets more attention when you plan for your future portfolio and of investment.
Yes, thank you. I think we're relatively agnostic in terms of portfolio building, and we don't plan what is going to be our investment strategy for the next 10 years, for example. This is absolutely non-credible. I think so, yeah. So we are very opportunistic, and that's what makes it a bit interesting as well, because things change very quickly, as we know, in one direction or other direction. And just to because the question is very much about different company portfolio building between venture investors and corporate venture investors, and I think it's very interdependent, interrelated, because we are on our side, we are very much looking for feedback from pharma and corporate funds about what they think about, and sometimes or many times they help us validate new approaches. As Laura said, they may often, and maybe more and more often, give a first impulse, one of the first traction to an early stage funding in a company that do something very innovative. So this is extremely important for the ecosystem today, and this kind of interaction is really extremely powerful and helpful, and build confidence also to build the future. So it's very, very important.
I can echo that as an independent VC. I mean, we definitely, our reasoning is about being opportunistic and taking advantage of being flexible, because usually we're like a small organization and we can easily adapt. Unless, yes, of course, when we are fundraising, we just have to agree on an investment thesis with the LPs, with the investors in the fund, and this is what we have to kind of at least high level stick to. But within the thesis, within the main investment thesis, yes, we try to be as opportunistic as possible. I'm interested in how EIB constructs the portfolio.
Well, that was just about, I perfectly assign what Thierry was saying, being agnostic and opportunistic. But the danger of being opportunistic lies that we cannot predict what is the pharma industry's day of the flavor of the day, because their approach or their scientific view of their specific portfolio actually impacts the investor's portfolio. Because what we need to do is to try to understand that, okay, where's our return coming from, and if there's no predictability on large pharma, on certain things, it immediately impacts on our opportunistic vision of a sort. And we have several examples of big pharma of suddenly changing their strategic views on certain therapeutic areas, and then you're left there out, as we say, out in the cold, playing the violin by yourself, and say like, whoa, it's just like taking the rug underneath our feet, just because of this pharmas decided to change their strategic view on certain therapeutic area. But having said that, how we built the portfolio, we are like Thierry, in a sense, we are agnostic. We build our portfolio, so we are investing about 500 million per annum on venture debt, which comprises tens of companies. We review about 1,500 to 2,000 companies per annum, and we build our portfolio just based on what we feel and what we see. It's ridiculous in the sense that, yes, we are science and data driven, but in the end, okay, science and data feels good here, there, and there, but what is our view that what will bring us the returns that we are looking for? And that's then the kind of like the critical question for us building the portfolio.
Okay, so I didn't bring my crystal ball today, so sorry about that. I think the other thing I would maybe just touch on is it's not so much like what the flavor of today is. I mean, like, it's pretty much published on everybody's website. So if you want to go and check out today, then, you know, go Google it or use Claude or something, and I'm sure you can get a list of what BMS is interested or Lilly's interested. Like, no one hides that stuff. Like, that's very, very much available. I think what you're really getting at is what's the flavor of tomorrow, which is perhaps a little bit harder to get at. But I think, you know, rather than guessing what pharma's going to be interested in the future, I think there's one thing that they do absolutely love is they love good data, and they're going to be driven by data-driven decisions. So, you know, I can use, let's use Lilly as an example. When I joined, I was doing introductory calls with some of my colleagues in oncology and, you know, what are you interested in? And they were like, you know, we're precision oncology, small molecules. You know, I can tell you what we'll definitely not do. We'll definitely never do any radiopharmaceuticals. Which obviously 3 years later is not the case. You know, again, it's an area and we've expanded our modality space because data became available, companies were successful, and that meant, gosh, we really need to be in this space. We believe in this. It's still precision oncology. It's still going to be very impactful for patients. So I would think less, and maybe this is a training from, you know, PhD or from, you know, from your studies, but, you know, it's less about like, what's everybody else doing? It's a little bit more, I think you need to have a little bit more conviction around like, what am I doing? If I think what I'm doing is really good and I'm going to get data in this and I can deliver on X, Y, and Z, then, you know, people will come. Like, you know, early stage companies with good data also get acquired. It's not just about, you know, you need to have some, you know, phase 3 ready or, you know, nearing approval type product and then pharma gets interested. Pharma acquiring all kinds of things all of the time and doing very significant partnerships. You know, 50%, if not 60% of all assets in pharma pipelines come from biotech. So, you know, and again, if one company decides to do a little less in one area than another because they've perhaps had an internal failure or they've even had a partnership that's fallen over from a scientific reason, you know, there's still the other universe out there as well. So, you know, what you lose with one is an opportunity often with another. So I think it's less, I mean, I wouldn't really focus on like guessing what pharma's going to be interested in. Like that's as a game no one should play because A, it's impossible. And I think it should be about, you know, having conviction on the science that you want to back and you want to spend time working on. And, you know, with good data, being able to then communicate and explain that, people will come. And I think that's actually consistent. And I think in terms of like the areas that people are interested in, I think it has become much broader. So, you know, when I started in venture, you know, no one ever looked at things in the obesity space. You know, we could never how would we possibly run those scale of clinical trials, cardiovascular? Oh, you know, there's lots of, you know, fairly old drugs that kind of okay. You know, again, running huge cardiovascular trials, not interesting. But that's also now, you know, now everyone's confident to kind of raise that kind of late stage capital and invest because they know that it's kind of valuable. And I think that opens up big areas as well. Like, I mean, you know, for example, we're looking a lot in the women's health space. Again, you know, big unmet need and big population problems. And so I think, and all pharma are doing this as well. I mean, I know, Diana, you and I have talked about the women's health space, and it's quite interesting that we have a lot of funds or a lot of individuals that are passionate about the space and say, oh, you know, I'm trying to do X, Y, Z in the women's health space. And I'm like, oh, that's so funny because I've just had 3 conversations with other people this week as well. So often people think, oh, we're the only folks, you know, pushing this field forward. But actually, we're gaining momentum on like spaces that have languished for perhaps even decades. So I think I'm really excited, but perhaps don't, like, you have to chase good data, but I wouldn't chase, you know, like the strategy particularly.
Agree.
It's just, as you were talking about female health, think about female health 5 years ago. Nobody was actually talking about it. It was nowhere, and suddenly, ping, it came out. And why it came, I don't know. But it's en vogue today. But it was completely dead 5 years ago.
I'm not. Well, I mean,
No.
depends on. I mean, I wouldn't say it's completely dead. I mean, I was at Advent Life Sciences beforehand with a number of other European investors investing in candy therapeutics, got sold to Bayer very successfully. So there are examples. They are few and far between, and they should be more. But I also think, whether you're talking about menopause, whether you're talking about preeclampsia, or whether you're talking about whole different, they haven't had the fundamental research, and they haven't had the amount of dollars thrown at them at the basic biology stage in the way that oncology or immunology has. And so there also aren't the experienced clinicians that have been used to running clinical trials. It's a much more fundamental problem. So it's not that people aren't interested, it's just that, even if you're interested in the space, the sort of normal things you expect, have we got a target we can focus on that's not the only one that people have been working on versus, it just doesn't have that diversity or scale. So, now that's starting to be addressed, which is great. And we've almost come at it from the perspective of, I guess from the kind of, the GLP-1 franchise, but then into, looking at cardiovascular, how, those sorts of different things are, affected in kind of menopause, and then thinking, well, actually vasomotor symptoms. And then you think, well, if you're doing menopause, then let's look at some of the other things that disproportionately affect or solely affect. So, I mean, I think it's growing, and it's good that it's growing. But I also don't think it's straightforward to just back a whole sway of women's health companies, because again, they don't actually have the data that a bunch of investors would actually need to do it, because they don't have all those validations of targets or models or any of those sorts of things.
Yeah, Laura, you know how passionate I am about the topic, and we can speak for hours. But I think, Michael, you had a comment?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo a lot of what has been said before, right? I think we've tried to look backwards into our crystal ball. There's a 20-year history for holdings, venture and holdings, and the bottom line is we couldn't identify a theme, we couldn't identify a stage. I wouldn't call it really random, but there's certainly no trend. And then I think that, so what it all boils down to me is sort of couldn't agree more. I mean, if you try to read where the puck's going to be, you're going to fail. But fundamentally, if you work on something that is really moving the needle, then I think, if you, what we call unmet medical need, whatever you want to call it, I think that's still the driving force. If this is just a minor improvement on something that is out there, why bother? If you're not really moving society, health care forward, then it's really not worth doing. And, honestly, sort of as soon as the data comes, I mean, it will come. I mean, and, it always takes bellwethers. I mean, GLP-1 story. I mean, you can talk to a lot. I mean, on the Novo Nordisk side, on how difficult that was to get that molecule through. I mean, I was a preclinical scientist at the time. The project was what they call partially funded. It just hung on a tiny little thread. Now that the data is there, of course, you can see it. And that's, of course, unfortunately, also the other truth is, I mean, especially VCs it's a bunch of lemming. Once you see something succeed, folks pile in, whether we like it or not. So I think from that perspective, Laura made a good point. I mean, sort of the corporates oftentimes are a lot more innovative. You go in early, you back sort of great ideas, whereas sort of the other guys that need to make a lot of money, so that they tend to come in once the proof has been established and then sort of pile in. That's why we see these mega rounds, right? I mean, that's the other, I don't know if I should call it unfortunate trend, but it's happening. Sort of once something works, I mean, you can attract almost any amount of funding, but before you've shown that there's a there, it's very, very difficult.
But equally, if everyone's pouring in, then your venture returns are often not brilliant either, because you've overcapitalized these companies. And so I think that's the other thing that we have to be super careful of. And, again, I think, the Novo Lilly example is a really good one. Those were homegrown successes. Actually, and it's funny because we always think about the next innovative thing coming from biotech, but actually, those were, I guess, decade-long programs, if not more than well over decade-long programs. And I think that's the really important thing, back really interesting novel things. And I think that is, we need all investors to do that and to have conviction on like a diversity of things, because no one really has, no one knows what, we, despite thinking we all know what's going to happen. I think we have to be realistic that we aren't fortune tellers.
What about comorbidities? The obesity space and discovering the metabolic aspects and the cardiovascular aspects. Yesterday's panel on Alzheimer's disease talked about co-pathologies and being alert to some of the things in the environment that you hadn't been expecting, but are there for you to see as you investigate something else.
Yeah, I think, well, honestly, again, so once you, coming back, the GLP-1s, which are really not part of holdings, again, that's Novo Nordisk's benefit. Also their risk-taking, right? The Alzheimer trials that unfortunately failed, but it was worth a trial. There was an observation there. It did work out for the cardiovascular. I'm not sure that we could see that before. And again, that's another trend. If you start to see the data emerge, I think you really have to back it and get the data to definitively say, well, there's there or not. So I think that's very important. And there's one aspect that I keep thinking about also from the keynote lecture just before us. So this holistic approach, that it's not just one thing. And in fact, if you actually look at some of the drugs that have quote unquote more pleiotropic effects, that then you actually do have an effect on weight loss, cardiovascular and inflammation. They tend to be the drugs that really move the needle rather than sort of the super precision fine instruments that may move the needle for a small amount of people. But it's really sort of those more bold innovations really that in my world and my belief system have really put us forward. So I think that's very important that we continue to invest in that and believe in that, and sort of, again, as we see emerging trends, that we actually pick up on them, investigate and put data behind it.
We're left with the last 2 minutes. And so just before we close the panel, I'm going to ask you if in a few words you could answer a very broad question. What do you see as being disruptive and in the next 20 years in the field? Just a few words. Let's start with Thierry at the end of the table and come back this side.
Okay, thank you. Easy question. No idea. So this is the answer. What is true is not about innovation, because I think we all are excited, enthusiastic about innovation. Really, something really new and a bit crazy that we discover every day. So this is what will drive us for the future. But what is definitely transformative is the way we will develop drugs in the world of tomorrow, or no, not tomorrow, today. So this will be more integrated, more global, and more virtual and networked. And I think this is a major change. So we have to be not prepared. It is reality today, but how to adapt to this reality.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, we just spend a considerable amount of time telling everyone that we don't have the crystal ball. So whatever I say now is definitely going to be wrong. And so I think, the major ingredient for for any future to come is really to stay curious and sort of push the boundaries. And then we're going to get more tools to do that better. But it's the general belief that you can do something better, that there is room for improvement that drives things forward. And as long as we keep that curiosity, I think, it will move along with or without AI. And but agree. We've already seen a lot of things become more integrated. Be faster, be better listening to each other. That will increase. But that's really sort of the curiosity is at the forefront of everything.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah, just very quickly. I think what we want to do is really maintain that risk on profile. Looking for that like tip of the spear is kind of what we often say. But I think also, we have to be mindful about right-sizing rounds and, right-sizing the capital that's required, because, while undercapitalization is a curse, overcapitalization is not the solution either. So I think just trying to be kind of, I guess, I think what's the term, like cost realism, I think is going to be really important, because again, we're all, I think, in that AI world right now where we're all getting used to all the tools, and that's great, and that will speed up a lot of things, but it's also comes at a cost of water, energy, etc. So it's not sort of just free. So we're going to have to sort of recalibrate some of that as well.
Thank you. Ari?
I'm following the lead of Laura in the sense that AI will dictate what comes on the future. We don't know what it brings. It already has revolutionized certain things in discovery. Next thing it will revolutionize is diagnostics, and what will be next? I mean, right now we cannot tell, and it's the great unknown, and whether it's the lack of water or lack of energy, but in the world of drug discovery and developing medicines, it is the great unknown.
Thank you, Ari. And Victoria?
I'm going to place my bet on a European capital market in the next 2 years. And if it's not the next 2 years, it'll be the next 5 years. But I'm completely certain that it's going to happen.
We can't wait. So if I may sum up and put it all together, we're going to see lots of progress in all areas of life science and medicine. So there will be a strong impact in longevity, overall survival of patients and people and individuals, and scarcity of resources. We mentioned water and energy, AI taking purpose also away from a number of people that will remain unemployed. So is that a catastrophic event? Overpopulation and the like. I think we should really pay a lot of attention to the latest development, and let's be more optimistic than that. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the audience, and looking forward to the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you for the moderators.